Hi everybody, it's Adrian Plass here, and of course at this point usually Bridget says, and it's Bridget as well, but actually Bridget is away this week in South Africa, which sounds rather cool for a wedding, and so it's just me, and so I've been thinking about what I might talk about this week as I have to make the choice, and I was thinking, someone said to me the other day, what are you writing at the moment? And I'm actually writing rather scrappy stuff, in the sense that spending a lot of time over things that sometimes seem to have not much worth, but then suddenly have a significance I hadn't guessed at. And some things that might be a waste of time, and I'm just not at all sure. The first one I thought of, and by the way, it's number 178 in Sounding the Shallows. I'm not used to being in the shallows on my own. This is very strange. I miss my wife very much. I read a limerick last time about Elijah, in which those who heard it will be aware that if you are determined to make the name Elijah fit into the limerick at the end of the first line, you have to improvise really quite strongly to do the rest of it. So here are several limericks tracing the career of Elijah, and each one has a different title. It begins where Elijah has faced Ahab very strongly, but then God says you're going to have to run, and he makes his way to a place where God has prepared some things for him. If you want to listen to the limericks, and after that, if you want to look at the story of Elijah, you'll see they do fit. So the first limerick is called The Taste of Fear. Said God, get your skates on, Elijah. That Ahab man cannot abide ya. I found a safe brook, and you won't have to cook. My weird vegan crows will oblige ya. So he goes to Zarephath after that, where there is a widow with her son living. Strange times with the widow, Elijah. Your stay there has troubled and tried you. She gave you some ticks for your long life bread mix, but the lash of her tongue petrified you. Elijah then announces to Ahab that there is going to be rain, and Ahab half wishes there will be and half wishes there won't, because if it comes, then it shows that God has the power that Elijah claims. Little cloud, wept Elijah. I loved you from when I first spied you. The king has a choice. He can weep or rejoice, but me, I thank God who supplied you. And the moment people talk about as Elijah's greatest moment of triumph, or God's, depending on how you look at it, is on the mountain where enormous power defeated the agents of evil. On the mountain, oh God, beamed Elijah. We eyeballed the ones who defied you. My stand-up went well, your enemies fell, and the people no longer denied you. We come to the point there where, despite this major triumph, Elijah becomes absolutely panic-stricken with fear. And this is the one you will have heard last week if you tuned into us. When God takes the reins, mourned Elijah, a miracle rises inside you, but courage decays on those Jezebel days when you find he's no longer beside you. And then the moment when Elijah decides he's going to sit under a tree and give up, and in fact he receives an unexpected treat. Your burnout burned sweetly, Elijah. A heavenly voice lullabied you. Bread was divine, water like wine, and your picnic with God apple pied you. And then to the cave where God asks him to come out, but he hides just inside the entrance to the cave, too frightened to come out. You crouched like a rabbit, Elijah. The thought of their swords terrified you. God's sonne lumiere was a hollow affair, but the voice of no voice pacified you. And at the end of it all, Elijah is allowed to finish. And God has promised already he'd be able to fly away, and that is exactly what happens. God smiled. You must fly now, Elijah. The king never boiled nor fried you. Your smart long-haul ride is parked just outside, and my heavenly sat-nav will guide you. We've thought so much about good old Elijah over the years and his cavern of inadequacy, but maybe that's enough for now. It nearly drove me mad working out all the Ijahs. Anyway, I did enjoy it. A very short thing I wrote was about a lot of churches are having trouble at the moment. There's a lot of unrest generally, of course, in view of the news and the way things are going, and people picking through the rubble of their Christian experience to find what's true and what isn't. And this may be a little flippant, but I think it does say something that might be of some use. It's very short. It's called Church Wine, and you'll see why in a moment. If the church that you thought you were running is starting to boil and seethe, treat it like vintage red wine. Pop the cork and allow it to breathe. You then, of course, have to work out which cork you pop and how you do it, and what are likely to be the consequences of doing that. This thing, which only one other person has seen, a person who wrote to me, and I sent him this because it seemed to fit the situation he was in, is really rather odd. And I'd be very interested to know what people make of it, having heard it. I'm not sure, though I actually wrote it. I'm not quite sure, except that for a long time, Bridget and I have been, and if you've listened to us, you will know, we've been fascinated by that verse in Hebrews 13:13, which is about going out of the city in order to be able to share in the shame of Jesus, the shame of Christ, which is a very strange scripture, and I deliberately have not looked at what anyone else thought about that, because I wanted to, as sometimes happens, let it seep into my understanding, so I would eventually be able to find what flows out. And I don't know whether that's cowardice or whether I don't know what the reason for that is. But it began after the coronation of the king here in England, and goes on from there to talk about an encounter between Jesus and a very needy and rather angry person. And the title of the poem, if that's what it is rather puzzlingly, After the Coronation, Hebrews 13:13. In a corner of the abbey, tired and a little shabby, friendless Jesus, still uncrowned, sighs and smiles when he is found. A voice that makes the echoes ring harshly chides the weary king. You want the story of my life? Okay. Nothing bright or kind or good. Never trusted anyone. Knew I never would. Comfort finds no root in me. Disappointment thrives in fear. You know my heart is barren soil, and yet you call me here. Shadows, they are my dark supports. I need them. Let them be. Light is weak and useless. Don't waste your stuff on me. My friend, I know your wilderness. It tried to capture me. That battle drove me to my knees, but it left me clean and free. Out beyond these city walls, there is a shame-filled space. Please meet me there. Receive your gift, a share in my disgrace. Eyes wide, the troubled soul is still, a tiny candlelight of prayer. But as he turns to leave, he smiles and says, I'll see you there. Triumph is not needed, nor despair. Find the guilty space. Meet him there. See how joy will light that tired face when you agree to share in his disgrace. What does sharing in his disgrace mean? There's a lot that can be said about that. All I will say is that I've begun to realize how necessary it is to be in the failure with Jesus, and for him to be in the failure with us, and for us to be open and not exactly positive, but be determined to tackle the things that look like shame but turn into resurrection at the sharp end, the sharpest end of all. If you read through and think through the story of Jesus' life, you will see what appears to be disgrace, and you will see how bravely he fought to continue to say and do the things that had to be done and said. And then there's something about John the Baptist, who I've always felt, and say felt sorry for. I think that's terribly patronizing, but when he finally is in prison, is in Herod's prison, and he wants to send a message to Jesus, because he suddenly lost his belief in the things that he'd thought about Jesus, and isn't completely sure that he got it right, which you might think is extraordinary when you think about the insight he had and the prophetic words he had and the stuff he said to tell people off. I mean, he was so confident. So this is obviously an imagined piece about what he might have said to the people who were going to talk to Jesus for him. Ask him this: are you the one? Once I knew you were. I was so sure that I was sure. Longing, language, memory, and old promises, whispers in the desert. It was sturdy stuff that made a working shape. It seemed to work, especially on the job. On the job it all seemed very clear. But now this dungeon world defeats the light. My hands are trembling. A lot of painful fear. It's so dark. It is so very, very dark down here when the light has upped and gone. Forgive me if I ask you once again, are you? Are you? Are you? Are you the one? Please, be the one. And the final thing I thought I'd read is not by me at all. Some people will have heard it before, I expect. It's by a friend of mine. And I think it's about one pathway which may take us much closer to understanding about coming through the problems and the difficulties and the darkness that we do face sometimes. And it's about truth. It's about saying what you feel and doing what you feel like doing. And it will seem very strange to, I think, to purely orthodox ears, because like all good poetry, it takes you into a place where you have to ask yourself questions that you wouldn't normally ask. And I think for me, it is a little bit like a psalm, but it's very powerful in its courage about what is actually happening in this person who is writing. It's called geology. So, here you are, my soul's ease. The stillness of your presence strikes me dumb. And here am I, standing now before you, lifting my head to look you in the eye. And then I slap you. A sharp, unbidden act that shocks. The sound of it rings out across this space, its pulse lingering, hanging in the air, as birds lift and flee, sounding an alarm. Its suddenness is slicing, instantaneously igniting. A core of molten mineral and stone. Its heat is a fury, raging and coursing and burning up the weight of all my years, and I am undone, unravelled and emptied, cooling, even as I fear I've gone too far. And you remain. You are simply there, bridging the gap of my despair. And these hands held out towards me are marked by jagged scars, and in them I can trace my name. There are no words between us. None are needed now. It is enough to know that I am fully known. Extraordinary piece of writing, and obviously the slap is a shock. But what I enjoy about it and draw profoundly from is the idea that it is perfectly fine to take all the pain and difficulty and crashing confusion that there might be in your life, whatever it actually is, as it was with Jesus during the course of his life, and to take it and say it and get it out, because it won't be received with rejection. Someone wrote to me recently saying their great fear was that if they really talked to God about what they thought of him or had felt about him, that they would be rejected. I think the exact opposite of that is the case. There are issues within the church at the moment that are not unusual in the history of church. That is, as we mentioned before, the sifting through the rubble when things go wrong, post-COVID stuff, all that kind of thing, which we've talked about too much probably. But I feel oddly positive now about Jesus. I always did, but much more sure that the truth has to be pursued, the way we feel has to be expressed, and that there will be more help for people through that than by positiveness that really has no root in the relationship with God, but in patterns and habits that we've acquired in the education we've received in the church world. And that isn't a criticism of everybody at all. It's just that that's what happens. We so want it to be okay. So I treasure that slap, and the consequences of it, the falling apart after it, the looking up after it, the seeing Jesus still there after it, the finding of his name still on the palms of his hands, and the possibility that then you don't need to talk in the same way anymore, because you are sharing his disgrace in some obscure way, and he is doing the same with you. And if you are able to work out exactly what that means, you are a better person than me. So I hope I haven't totally confused you, and I promise you that next week Bridget will be with us. So goodbye, bye-bye.